On Thursday, we continued to look back at some of the best players, ranking multiple offensive bests of the last 10 years, which encompasses the majority of the Jim Harbaugh era. We've got one more offensive position to get to today, but then we are also going to get to two defensive positions. We're going to do all of that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Friday. We're back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And yes, still on vacation. So we are continuing our Listapalooza and doing all of that. So let's get to our continuation of the best position groups or best 10 players in each position group for the last 10 years. So let's start off with tight end and then we'll move to defense. I am cheating on number 10 because he's known more as a fullback, but I'm including him in with the tight ends because he did technically play tight end. He started out as tight end. And kind of the fullback position is kind of a tight end position in a way. Like, look no further than Max Bredesen. But I'm going Khalid Hill, the Hammer and Panda, at number 10. Again, made his name as the fullback. Could have put him in with the running backs. I decided not to put him in with the tight ends. He ended up just being a touchdown scoring machine and a fan favorite and doesn't know how to carry a pizza. I say that because once I saw him at Pizza House after the radio show, and he was carrying a pizza like a book. I'm like, that's not how you do it, Khalid. And he's also I call him Meme City because he is a walking meme. And I adore him. Number 9, Nick Eubanks. It's kind of funny. Eubanks is just kind of underrated, right? Like, he was like the next man up at tight end, but he certainly, like, going and looking at the stats, like, he had a pretty good stats, right? And he really could stretch the field. It really kind of started in 2017 against Florida, and then he kind of fell off the map. It was really more 2019, 2020. So it wasn't like he was like a guy that everyone was really talking about a lot. But nonetheless, he was better than people kind of remember, I think. Number 8 is Eric All. I would love to put him higher, but alas, it didn't all fully come together for him in Ann Arbor. His injury, obviously, all of that. Devastating block in the opening touchdown, actually 2 touchdowns against Ohio State in 2021. Obviously, everyone's going to think of the 40-something yard touchdown, 47-ish yards, 46, something like that, against Penn State to essentially win that game. Eric All, really tons of potential. Hopefully he still gets drafted high. He ended up declaring for the NFL draft. Would have loved to have seen what he could do full-time, full health, all of that kind of stuff. But definitely the Michigan State game in 2021, if Michigan would have won that, people would be talking about just how electric he was in that game too. Number 7 is Sean McCune, who another guy who I think was really underrated. Just kind of a tight end that did everything right, kind of like your perfect tight end in a lot of ways. And didn't necessarily have like a big signature moment. If I think of like my favorite Sean McCune moment, it was when he scored the, I think it was the opening touchdown of the 2017 Minnesota game. And then he went up to the student section and hushed the crowd because he just wasn't thinking. It was just kind of funny. Nonetheless, Sean McCune ended up, I think he's still with the Cowboys, the Dallas Cowboys. Undrafted free agent, just managed to just stick there. So doesn't necessarily see a ton of time, but he's been on the 53-man roster there, just absolutely killing it. Number 6 is a now departing guy, and that's A.J. Barner. I feel like Barner, man, I would have loved to see more than 1 year with him. The Michigan State game, absolutely phenomenal. I mean, he was phenomenal all season. That was the breakout. I think one more year with A.J. Barner would just put things up at the top. I shouldn't say up at the top. There's another guy on the team that's pretty good. But I just think that he really could have risen. And he's got a lot of athleticism. I'm curious to see where he goes in the NFL draft because someone's definitely going to take him. in a lot of ways kind of reminds me of number 5, and that's Zach Gentry, who converted from quarterback, ended up really coming on strong in 2017, ended up being one of the leading receivers in 2018, and just became, it kind of didn't start the outlet, the tight end as outlet. Obviously, there's another guy on this list that really became that person, but like really you knew you were going to get some big plays from Zach Gentry most of the time. Now, had some aberrational plays. 2018 against Ohio State, dropped the sure touchdown in the end zone. Kind of surprising, which is probably why he's not higher on the list, but still 5th best, ended up being drafted to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Number 4 was a guy who I love when I get to say this, a guy that people complained about when he committed. Could have been on my my list of underrated. I didn't put him on there because I just forgot, because he just kind of felt like he belonged for so long, and that's Luke Schoonmaker, right? Because you had Luke Schoonmaker and Eric All. Well, at first it was Luke Schoonmaker and Nick Eubanks, and then down the line it's it's Luke Schoonmaker and Eric All, and it feels like it's supposed to be Eric All as the star, and Luke Schoonmaker ends up just getting touchdowns, making big plays, and before you know it, he's one of the best tight ends Michigan's had in a long time. 2nd round draft pick by the Dallas Cowboys, and for good reason. So Luke Schoonmaker is my number 4. My number 3 is Devin Funchess. Yeah, it's kind of cheating because I also have him on the wide receiver list, which we did on Thursday. But he was a tight end. He started out the first 3 years as tight end, then switched over to wide receiver. But big body guy. Again, bright spot in a dark time. I'd say that about any good player in the Brady Hoke era for the most part. Devin Funchess is my number 3. I don't have much more to say about him than that. Number 2 is a guy who will probably end up being number 1 at this time next year. And that's Colston Loveland. He is getting there, right? Like, makes huge plays. 2 years in a row against Ohio State. Had some huge plays against Alabama in the national championship game. Less against Alabama, but he had a couple. I can't remember. National championship game. He had the big long run. Thought to be the eventual best tight end Michigan's ever had. Draws a lot of Brock Bowers comparisons. I think he'll end up being number 1. And the number 1 person on this list believes so as well. And that's Jake Butt, the Mackey Award winning tight end. Former co-host on this show on Fridays and did X's and O's with me on Tuesdays. Jake Butt, All-American, comes back, puts it all on the line. It doesn't get much better than Jake. Dear friend, my number 1 tight end of the past 10 years. Heck, the best tight end Michigan has ever had to this point. So thank you, Jake, for that. Let's move on to defense. We're going to do that here in just a moment. But before we do, happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel. It's America's number 1 sports book. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about the scoring, the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and then scoring in the betting apps. That's FanDuel. So there are so many amazing things about FanDuel. The same game parlays and the Parlay Hub is what makes it my favorite. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with the W or 2 or 3. You can't just pick one, right? You can't just pick one same game parlay. You got to put some, sprinkle them around, get a bunch, see what works. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. And new customers, if you join today, you can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So you're going to want to play around with that before the Super Bowl comes on Sunday. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's continue on. Let's move into defense. And let's get to let's start with the edge rushers. The best edge rushers Michigan has had in the past 10 years. Every single one of these guys I'm about to mention played under Jim Harbaugh. Now, yes, some started at a different time. Started under Brady Hoke, or at least they started their careers. Not necessarily started. But here's the thing. is you knew that if you were the number one edge rusher for Michigan, you were getting drafted. If you were maybe not the number one edge rusher, were the number two and had a lot of talent, you were just going to go in the first round, right? Like if you were just like a freakish athlete. So that's just how it's gone. It's been true so far. So I'm looking, I don't have any current players on this yet at this moment, but I do have Jalen Harrell at number 10. I think that he is probably better than what we kind of give him credit for, but obviously his play in the final defensive play against Ohio State was just, if not more important than Rod Moore's interception, right? Now, Rod Moore doesn't make the interception. They have at least another play to go. Who knows what happens? But Jalen Harrell is just so athletic, just able to knock. Can't remember which offensive lineman was. Was it Matthew Jones? Knocks him over, gets just enough to Kyle McCord to cause the errant pass and seal that game. I mean, he's got to be on the list for that alone. Number 9 is Mike Morris. Injury kind of laden year when he finally got to be a starter in 2022. But nonetheless, I mean, what he did against Wisconsin, what he did against Iowa at Iowa was important in and of itself. So I think that that is deserving, but obviously just he was the impact player Michigan needed on defense. That's as far as the edge rushing, and Michigan got from him what they absolutely needed. Number 8 is Taco Charlton. He was led the team with 10 sacks, was so close in 2016 to tying Chris Hutchinson's record at that time of 11. I think it was 11. So he was so close to it. Ended up having 2.5 sacks in a losing effort against Ohio State in 2016. Quarter of his sack production on the year. That tells you how good he played in that game, and he got held on every play. An absolute beast, first round draft pick. Didn't really become that dude in the NFL, but still, Taco Charlton became that dude in his final year in Ann Arbor. Number 7 is Rashawn Gary, the number 1 recruit in the country in 2016. Did not really live up to that hype, right? Everyone expected Jadeveon Clowney, and Michigan had him more so setting the edge and opening things up for another guy on this list. But obviously, you're seeing the freakish athleticism as he's an outside linebacker for the Green Bay Packers. I would love to see Rashawn Gary in the scheme Michigan's run the last 3 years. I think it'd be a whole different story, right? I mean, he's an absolute freak, but didn't necessarily have that production. Some will say he took some plays off. That might be true, but he also commanded some double teams and opened things up as well. Number 6 is a guy I feel is underrated and should be talked about more, and that's Chris Wormley. Yeah, I have Wormley over Taco. Taco was the more freakish athlete, but Chris Wormley was a guy that just got home. Right now, Chris Wormley actually had less sacks than Taco did. But still, like, it felt to me in the time, maybe it's just because he was, I like Chris Wormley more. I have him at my number 6 because I just felt like he was the one. And plus, team captain, I think that stands for something, right? Number 5 is actually an outside linebacker, but with, pass rusher and all that. That's Josh Uche, who actually did better than some of the guys ahead of him on the list overall. You knew that the problem for Uche is that in his time, he wasn't like a full-time guy. But you knew on third down under Don Brown, they were putting Uche out there. This Uche, as Don Brown would say. They put him out there, and everyone knew what he was going to do. He was going to rush the quarterback. And guess what he would do? He would get to the quarterback. Led the team in sacks, I think, 2 straight years. Memory serves. So he's my number 5. My number 4 is like Josh Uche 2.0. And that's David Ajabo, except for he stayed on the field. Everyone's always going to think of his big sack, timely sack late in the 2021 Ohio State game. Ajabo. I mean, kind of came out of nowhere to get 11 sacks in 2021. Yeah, he was a 4-star recruit and everything, but like guy who barely had even played football had to kind of learn late in his career here, and just absolutely thrives under Mike McDonald. So David Ajabo is my number 4. My number 3 goes to Kwity Paye. guy who really exceeded expectations. As I said in the last segment, what do I love to say? Someone that people complained about when he committed. I remember when he committed, I was driving. I was in Heartland. I stopped off at Big B Coffee to write up his commitment story. And I just remember all of the complaints. Well, by the time he left, he was one of the best defensive ends that Michigan had ever had. Just absolutely phenomenal. And obviously a first-round pick for a reason. Would have loved to have seen what he could have done if he stayed one more year. But obviously, first-round pick to the Indianapolis Colts. So there you go. Number 2. Gets number 2 in part also because he was a fan favorite. Looking at the production, and weirdly, not as high as I thought. But it felt like he was the star of the show on defense when he was out there, and that's because he was, and that was Chase Winovich. I mean, absolutely a fan favorite from really when he came in a backup role in 2016, but 2017 and 2018, it was really honestly more Josh Uche who had the success, but Chase Winovich kind of stole the show. So he's my number 2. My number 1 is obviously Aiden Hutchinson. It's funny, all of these is like you know who the number 1 is going to be for the most part. Once we get to the best cornerbacks, actually I did it as defensive backs in the past 10 years, you're not necessarily going to know who the number 1 is because there's a couple candidates that could be there. So we're going to get to those here in just a moment. Tell you what, I've been talking here for, we did Monday's episode, then we did Wednesdays, Thursdays, and now Fridays. I've been talking for we're nearing 2 hours of straight talking. So we're going to see how this goes. It's been a long time. And then I got to write all these. Not all of them. I haven't written. Most of these I haven't written. Most of them I just have them written down. And got to do that before I get on the plane. Or at least that's the plan. I was going to do it tonight. Maybe that's not happening. Tonight being Monday, by the way. I know it's Friday for you. Monday for me. Anyway, all right, let's get to the best 10 defensive backs of the past 10 years. All of these were Jim Harbaugh people as well. I feel like I didn't write this, so I didn't change it up. Sorry to Channing Stribling, who was going to be number 11. I love you, Channing. I think that you are underrated, but since I combined cornerback and defensive and safety on this, it didn't quite, you kind of just missed the cut slightly. So number 10 is Josh Metellus. And I know there's a lot of people that still get angry about his dropped interception in the 2017 Ohio State game, but he was so good pretty outside of that almost all the time. Yes, there were a couple lapses here and there. The 2019 Penn State game when he was beat deep by, was it KJ Hamler, I think. And then people blamed him for that, but Don Brown was like, that was a miscommunication on my part. So there you go. But Metellus ends up being a undrafted free agent, and then he becomes a starter and a team captain with the Minnesota Vikings. And at the time of his commitment, he was a 2-star. Right? Remember, Michigan got 3 guys from Charles Flanagan High School in Miami, and it felt like they were offering Devin Gill and Josh Metellus to try to get Devin Bush. And then Devin Gill at the time was a 3-star, and Josh Metellus was a 2-star. No one really cared. He ended up being not as good as Devin Bush, of course, but like pretty close. And his pro career has gone better than Devin Bush's has, weirdly. Number 9 is DJ Turner, who stepped in and did really well at the end of 2021 and was an incredible starter in 2022. It was a long time coming, but then once he finally kind of got going, I mean, he was pretty close to lockdown. Speedy, everything you wanted at corner. Number 8 is Ambry Thomas, who I actually have below some guys here that all said Ambry was going to be better than them. And I think Ambry was very good. I think we needed to see one more year of his play. And that was the intention, right? But COVID year and things changed and left, tried to come back, all that kind of stuff didn't really work out. But Ambry Thomas was a perfect type of cornerback for Don Brown's system, man coverage. And it was kind of rare that we saw these Detroit guys for a little while really like being, well, I shouldn't say it was rare. They had one every year. But nonetheless, as a returner as well, if I put him as a returner, he'd be up higher. But Ambry Thomas, my number 8. Number 7 is Lavert Hill, who I think was a lot better than people kind of give him credit for. And now playing opposite Ambry for 1 year, but he played opposite David Long. There wasn't like a lot of him giving anything up. And I'm still kind of surprised that he ended up not, being drafted and ended up being mostly a practice squad guy. But Lavert Hill gets my number 7. My number 6 is a guy that will probably be much higher next year, coming back for his senior year. That's Rod Moore, safety. Obviously, he called game against Ohio State. One of the best safeties in the country, let alone conference, let alone, on this list. He is the highest rated safety. Nope, second highest rated safety I have on this list. Obviously, you can now guess who's next. But Rod Moore did an absolutely phenomenal, done a phenomenal job over his tenure thus far, and still ascending. Only really weak spot was, obviously gave up the Rutgers opening touchdown and one play from the playoff, and I can't remember which one because forgot it that quickly. Number 5 is David Long, who absolutely locked down his side of the field, especially in 2018. Would have loved to have seen what another year would have ended up for with him, but I mean, just perfect type of player, perfect type of system, all that kind of stuff. Great dude. I had the pleasure of interviewing him multiple times as a recruit, including in person after he had signed. David Long's my number 5. Don't have much more to add to that. Number 4 is Dax Hill, the top-rated safety nickel, thrown to the Wolves as the safety in year 1. Former 5-star, really shown. Had some kind of lapses in 2020. Came roaring back in 2021. Thought that he played. He was the best defensive back Michigan had in 2021, easily. Which, I mean, no one else on this list was playing defensive back at that time. Wink. But he is my number 4. Number 3 is a guy who could end up as number 1 on this list once everything is said and done. It's the last current player on here. Only current player on. No, Rod Moore. Already said it. See, told you. I've been talking for 2 hours. Don't know what's going on. Will Johnson, obviously. Will, just don't even throw at Will most of the time. I mean, when Ohio State threw on Will, right, in this past year, he's on one leg, and he still managed to get an interception, undercut Kyle McCord's throw, getting inside leverage against Marvin Harrison. But so many big plays, perfectly timed interception in the national championship game. I mean, you don't get that. Who knows what happens? But just an absolute ball hawk. You're generally not going to complete passes on him. You're more likely to give up an interception than you are to complete a pass on him. So Will Johnson ends up being my number 3. Number 2, this was hard. Like I said, you don't necessarily know who number 1 and number 2 is. Number 2 is Mikey Sainristil. And I probably should have him at number 1. I don't really remember my rationale when I came up with this list. But number 2 is Mikey Sainristil. Timely playmaker. This is probably going to change in the written version, I'll tell you that. Timely playmaker, right? Maryland, gotta have it. Gets two picks. National championship game, gotta have it. Mikey Sainristil gets the interception, the long interception. Gotta have it in the Big Ten championship game. Creates 2 fumbles, right? Like he was responsible for the culture turnover probably more than anyone outside of Aiden Hutchinson. Team captain, another guy who wasn't hated on when he flipped from Virginia Tech, but he wasn't like celebrated. Started his career at wide receiver. Cade Stover knock away, the Travion Henderson hit. I mean, so many iconic moments. You know what? I'm changing it to number 1. My number 2 now is Jordan Lewis. Team captain, came back in a year where he did not need to. He could have been drafted coming out of 2015. Came back, team captain, fan favorite, one-handed interception, falling away against Wisconsin, sealing the game. Granted, if he doesn't intercept it, Michigan's actually closer, but didn't really matter. They weren't trying to score at that point. Just an electric player. You just basically couldn't throw on him in 2016. And 2015 had the absolute, it just felt like a powerhouse matchup between him and Aaron Burbridge in the Michigan State game. Obviously still playing in the NFL for a reason. JD, I have him at number 2 now. He was number 1. Now he's number 2. So that's it. We made an executive decision late here. All right. I know it doesn't seem like it to you because you have been sitting here digesting episode by episode on a daily basis. I've been talking for 2 hours. So we are done for the day. That's it. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will be back next week. If there was breaking news this week, we will address it next week. So thanks again. We will talk to you soon. Peace.